Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Newmark, and I'm in my office. And there seems to be some heavy equipment outside of my office window, so I'm hoping that you can't hear it too much in this video and that it's not too distracting. Anyway, this is the week 2 highlights video, and I'm hoping that you find my synthesis of some of the main themes in the 2 scholarly articles that you read today to be useful as you start assembling these ideas together. So without further ado. Okay, so here you have a picture of Donnie Johnson-Sake. I know him, he's an incredible scholar, and he actually was a speaker here in our department in November 2019, actually October 2019, when we used to have a conference called Time for Teaching, which is a graduate student event here on campus. Anyway, Donnie has moved along from that time when he was an assistant professor at Wayne State University to University of Texas at Austin, where he is now. You can look him up, look up his other scholarship. He's been doing a lot of amazing things. So the article that you read for today, actually a book chapter, was in an award-winning volume, and Donnie's piece has gotten a lot of reads since then, and I'm assigning it in this class. He wrote it when he was an assistant professor at Wayne State University, which is in Detroit, and that happens to be my graduate institution where I got my PhD. Before Donnie was there. And I really appreciate how he uses this applied approach to technical and professional communication, which is very immersed in community needs and service. So I'm going to synthesize here some of the things that I thought were most important in his article. So he argues that technical communicators, students and practitioners alike, need theories and heuristics to guide their work, particularly around the racial, economic, and cultural backstories of environmental injustice. So he follows Godwin Agboka, another important tech comm scholar, in putting this approach very simply. Technical communicators must be attuned to other cultural phenomena that form the social conditions that comprise the everyday in situated locales. So as you can see, much of what I'm sharing with you threads the needle between situated rhetorics and technical communication, as well as material rhetorics. And perhaps you've studied these in other classes in our master's and PhD program in rhetoric and writing. So Sake's emphasis on theories of space and place foregrounds this confluence of approaches. So these concepts about what exactly space is and what exactly place is are very at home in the discipline of human geography. Of course, when we think of geography, we think of maps and relational concepts of places in a 2-dimensional space as rendered from a 3-dimensional space. Space and place have accumulated a lot of theoretical attention as terms that can help us conceive of relationality between humans and non-humans alike, which is another concept that he introduces in this chapter. So he shares a story of the profit-driven policies enacted at the Rouge Steel site in southwestern Detroit and in Dearborn, Michigan, which is adjacent to Detroit. And I show a historical picture from the Library of Congress on the screen of Rouge Steel. So there were dire human impacts of this site's environmental recklessness or the indifference to its human neighbors. And this is just one example of this much larger phenomenon. Because Donnie was living and working in Detroit, he was able to study technical communication impacts and interventions both at Rouge Steel and during the Flint water crisis as another example. So Sake deploys a few theoretical strategies in his writing: feminist materialism, feminist political ecology, ecofeminism, and environmental justice, to offer a sense of how acquiring a new lens can equip technical communicators ethically and responsibly to have theory of environment and a theory of justice. So what does it mean to center people in the scientific stories we tell? Our next unit after this environmental rhetoric unit is on scientific writing and scientific rhetoric. Of course, I've explained that these aren't discrete units, environmental, scientific, and medical. In fact, there's so much overlap between them. And in fact, as I mentioned in my first video, we can really puzzle over the conundrum of, are we studying a genre or a category of writing in order to learn how to do it in a vocational sense? Or are we looking into more of the sublime theoretical elements or the more subtle components about the human impacts and the stories that these categories of information contain. Like an environmental impact statement, while it is a legislative compliance related document, it still tells a story. And I think Nest work and Donnie's work, they bring forth this concept of these stories aren't only about capitalism. They're not only about oppression or race or class or gender, nor are they only about humans and human situatedness in these networks of concepts. They're about non-humans too, and how the environment is impacted by human decisions. I really appreciated how Clary Lemon said last week that we need to think in a more birdie way, see if we can almost sideline our human default and think more in a non-human centered fashion. So centering people is a really interesting question in scientific discourse, especially when we think about the non-human dimension there too. So we can't avoid the blurred lines between scientific and environmental writing and technical communication. So I ask, is scientific communication historically oriented towards the people or towards disciplinary specialists? And what is the impact of such positioning? Scientific scholarly writing is very much written for other scientists, and that often is the material out of which policy emerges. What if we open that up, as we're going to see in the next reading that I discuss, to the people whose lived experiences are impacted by some of these changes, the people whose worlds the scientists study? Sake outlines many feminist explanations of the man versus nature paradigm and other kinds of dualisms like that. So he writes about space and place thus. By raising the idea of space and place, I'm focusing the need to understand location in proportion to power within analysis. So space and place and how we conceive of them always have something to do with power and power dynamics. Further, the feminist materialist perspective puts a finer point before us. He writes, a more localized analysis of power relations within situated locales, namely the body. The body is always situated in a place, place where you live, a place where you work, a place where you form relationships, rear children, make a living, whatever it might be. Space is a more broadly conceived of concept, but still bodies populate these domains, not just human bodies either. So Sake's pedagogical goal in the class that he describes is one that I share. He writes, I wanted to redesign the course so that my students and I could trouble what environmental, nature, and travel writing are as genres, but also interrogate the often unexamined cultural positions that these writers rely on to create a view of nature. So writing can allow us to remake a place. And I ask, how so? I really love the sort of activist aspect of his work as a technical communication pedagogue. And he actually works in sort of community justice settings and is a kind of a public intellectual in a lot of ways. And I think noting that technical communication isn't just this unemotional procedural vocation, that it is in fact a theoretical and largely creative enterprise is important for us to consider. And in fact, Josephine Walwema, a UNM alumna, brings this concept into the foreground as well. This article was called Participatory Policy, Enacting Technical Communication for a Shared Water Future. Josie is an amazing award-winning scholar. I am the editor of a journal called Exchanges, and one of Josie's first pieces was published in Exchanges like 15 years ago, and she's gone on to do such amazing things since then. So I'm proud to share a piece of her work with you. So her work focuses on this particular set of documents related to the water crisis in Cape Town. She explains, the city of Cape Town strived to bring together science and local knowledge. Scientific public and non-scientific public, these are two concepts that she introduces. How does the relationship between them constitute a deficit model? Well, if you think about non-scientists as somehow lacking scientific training or knowledge, then that is absolutely a deficit that one population represents as compared to the other population that is buoyed about by this knowledge that they possess that somehow gives them more savvy about a topic. So how do technical communicators help in the construction of the future? By breaking down the binary between the technical and the social. She uses her case in this article to demonstrate how that happens. So how does the Cape Town example show policy that includes public participation? So in usability studies and user experience design, this is called participatory work, participatory design, participatory testing. So through the whole emergence process of a new search engine or a new video game or a new piece of documentation or a style guide or whatever it might be, participatory design would include the users in the whole development cycle. Similarly, by having these kinds of documents written not just by quote unquote experts or SMEs, subject matter experts, but involving local knowledge, the buy-in by the larger community is going to be better. And in this case, environmental change that is needed in order to have water sustainability is going to be more possible. So regulatory texts as technical communication can be thought of this way. They entail a complex writing process between science and technology. In fact, what they need to do is bridge those things together with public knowledge, Josie argues. Do you know what multimodal semiotics are? She mentions this in her article. I'd love for you to look that up. I'm not going to spend the time to describe it, although if you were in my visual rhetoric class ever, then you would probably be able to figure this out. And how can multimodal semiotics be used to support relevance and applicability? So moving beyond science says so towards crafting problem-solving documents is what Josie is attempting to study via an example in this piece. So is Walwema all in all positive about the City of Cape Town's policy strategy and its communication components? I think she is. I think she uses this as a case study of success, but maybe you see it differently. I'm curious to hear what you think. How do these communications involve both expert knowledge and local knowledge? What are the examples she uses of community-based knowledge and facilitating community-based buy-in to a large regional crisis? So quickly to conclude, I want to briefly mention that I know you scanned those 3 environmental impact statements for this week. One of them was huge, hundreds of pages long. I told you just to scan it, not read it. I just wanted you to get a sense of the structure. So how do these EISs reflect any of the theories or values that Sake or Walwema explore? And how do they not reflect those values? Now, I have up on the screen a link, and in the Google Doc or Google slide that's included below this video, you can also see this, but it wasn't linkable for some reason. So this is from the National Preservation Institute. It's a succinct explanation of environmental impact statements and how many are created each year and their use with regard to major federal actions. So if you want a little bit of a really concise presentation about EISs by this organization, I would recommend that you visit that website, and you can easily just type in that URL since it's not clickable. But I'm really excited to see your reactions to these texts in the discussion board this week.